Hi everyone. Also an addict. So my experience, strength, and hope. How it works asks us share our experience, strength, and hope with each other, and a lot of the program does. So it's an honor to be here. It's a privilege to be able to speak in front of everyone. It's an important part of the program, bringing a message, and I'll try to bring the message as best as possible. So when I say I'm an alcoholic and an addict, I was a hopeless variety when I came in here. Actually, tonight, close to 3 years ago, hopefully will be early morning will be the last drink I had. So it's been a long journey the last few years. I started out in Alcoholics Anonymous when I was 19, up at Doylestown. Andrew's Hall was the first meeting I was introduced to. Scared to death coming into the room. It just had some legal repercussions, and I had a lot of fear. And I stuck around for about a year and a half. I didn't want it, really. I was still too young, I thought. And I went back out and I dug another hole for a few more years. Got more legal trouble. It was suggested I come back to the room. I did. Came back to Andrew's Hall. And I stuck around for about 10 years up there. I moved down to Delaware County, and then things started getting better. And around 15 years, I decided that I could drink again. So I did for 12 more years. And that ended almost 3 years ago. So that's just a little bit of my story. I grew up, I was a hurt kid. I was a hurt person. I was a hurt kid. There was a lot of trauma. There was a lot of dysfunction. There was abuse. And that all shaped me. So I was a hurt person that hurt people. And I never knew it. It seemed all normal to me. My parents seemed to be loving parents for the most part. They split up very young. I know that was very hard on my parents. That was hard on me too, as a young kid. We moved around a lot, so it was kind of like a military lifestyle. Going to a new school every 2 years, it was hard. So that was how I was kind of living at a young age. I was full of fear. And then I think by the time I was 10 or 11, my addiction started kicking in. And I started acting out. My parents had no clue what to do with me. I just found a picture the other day at my mother's house. It was an old photo album of me as a baby. And there's a picture in there I didn't bring it along, but there's a pitcher in there. And my mom has a drink, and I'm sitting there, and it's being lifted up to me, and she wrote on there, little Stefan getting tipsy on mom's drink, right? So, I remember sipping alcohol at a very early age in my career. So, I don't have alcoholism in my family that I know of. There may be some problem drinking. There may be some isms with my parents. I don't know if they've crossed. I don't think they've crossed over a line. So I crossed over a line very early on. I went basically through the fun stage and the functional stage very quickly. And by the time I was probably 18, 17, I was medicating myself. I was drinking to oblivion. And that's how I drank every day. I drank to oblivion every day. When you deal with when you have undealt with trauma and stuff like that, for me, I medicated myself. That's what I knew to do, and it's how I knew how to escape. I never wanted to be myself, so I would escape. And I found a sense of ease and comfort in alcohol, and I drank to oblivion every day. So coming to AA at a young age, full of fear, all kinds of stuff going on, and I thought I could do it an easier, softer way. Talks about that. We try to do it an easier, softer way, and I took a look at the steps on the wall when I walked in back in '96 again. And I said, yeah, I didn't remember them from 1990. But I looked at him, I said, yeah, I can't do all that. No way, I can't do all that. So there's a line in the big book, it's on page 82. It talks about the tornado roaring his way through the lives of others. Sweet relationships are dead. That seems to be my experience. And at the end of that, it says that he says something about he thought being sober would be just enough. What does that mean? So to me, that means abstinence doesn't work for me. When I'm in abstinence, I'm still restless. I'm still irritable, like restless. Think about a dog trying to lay down, restless. You see dogs trying to circle around, find a place to nest. I'm still restless inside when I'm abstinent. I'm irritable. I'm angry. I was an angry person. And I was still angry. And I was discontent. Nothing was ever really good enough. And this was how I was in abstinence. So no wonder I drank again. Because I never worked on all the interior things that I needed to work on. I thought I could manage my own life. Thought I could manage sobriety. I tried doing things my own way. Thought I could do an easier, softer way. I could try doing things my own way. And I looked on it, like I said, I looked on steps on the wall. I said, no, I'm not going to do that one. I'm not going to do that one. Maybe I'll do this one. And I'm not going to get a sponsor, right? I don't need a sponsor, you know. And I looked at a couple friends. I had some friends that sponsored me, which meant that we didn't do any of the hard work. So that's how I tried to manage my sobriety. And that failed me utterly. You know, the book talks about, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about our willpower. And, you know, that's pride and ego. And that's what I held on to. And I never really gave up my will all those years. So, you know, I get restless, irritable, discontent. I need to find a sense of ease and comfort in something, and I find a sense of ease and comfort in alcohol. You know, and then I start to cycle all over, and I drink to oblivion on a daily basis. So I needed a solution coming in this time that was more than just not drinking. And right about tonight, I'll probably be, you know, I'm working on getting loaded 3 years ago, and I'll get woken up to a knock on the door, and I'll be asked to leave my home, and then sometime tomorrow I'm hungover and homeless, and I made it to a beginner's meeting that night. And then the day after, I went into a rehab. I was fortunate enough to be able to get into a rehab again. And I got there and said, how did I get here? I've been here before. How did I get here? Right? You know? And then, I'll tell you, things haven't been the same since. To me, this whole program is about change. I'm a firm believer, if I'm not changing, if I'm not learning and I'm not growing, I'm not changing. And I needed a revolutionary change. I could not do things the way I used to do, because that's going to take me back to where I was. I don't want to go back there. Is that person, that's a hurt person that hurts people. It's not my intention to do that. So I live in a contradiction when I'm in active addiction. I also live in a delusion when I'm in active addiction, because I think I got this. Yet the disease has me, because I'm a slave to alcohol and other substances. I need to fill that big black hole in my body, that hole in the soul, and I would try to fill that with anything exterior. I try to fill it with alcohol, other things. Didn't matter. Sex, shopping, you name it. Whatever I try to fill that hole with, you know. And it never worked. You know, eventually the shine would wear off, you know, and I'd have to try and fill it with something else. So I needed to work on the externals. And when it comes to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I think, you know, it's change. It all comes down to change. And the steps guide us through the change. You know, it says, first line in how it works, it says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Now, I know in my experience, I never tried to follow that path. I tried to follow my own path, and that failed me miserably. Right? So, I'm like, what's the path? What's the path? Right? You know? So, I start getting into the history of AA. and start learning about the history of AA. And that's an amazing story. I don't have time to go through that tonight, but that is an amazing story to me. So I'm trying to find the path, and I meet a sponsor. I knew I had to get a sponsor coming out of rehab, and this guy appears. I couldn't say 2 sentences coming out of rehab. My brain fog lasted 2 years, a good 2 years. About a year and a half is when I like to call it the awakening of having the beer goggles removed. Or even better is the goggles of selfishness coming off. I never realized how selfish and self-centered I was, and around a year and a half is when that happened. So a lot of things have happened going through sobriety. For 15 years, we would read How It Works, and for 15 years, it sounded like Charlie Brown's teacher. How It Works sounded like Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, 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 right? And about 3 months sober, I'm sitting in a park out in Fort Washington Sunday morning at the outdoor meeting over there. And we were reading How It Works, and this big light bulb went over. Like, oh my God. Wow, I'm starting to understand things, right? And, I hold How It Works very dear because it saved my life in the very beginning. As I was still in suicidal ideation, I was looking for a tree to end things all, and I had one picked out. Out in Drescher, this big, huge 200-year oak tree right on the bend of this golf course. And I drive by it at work, and I'm going to and from work, and I would drive by this tree, and I would say, "Do not be discouraged, Stefan." Right? That line from How It Works, "Do not be discouraged." And I would say that to myself every morning. And then finally, around 10 months, 11 months of sobriety, maybe even a year, it was a beautiful Friday, kind of like September, like today, and I drove by the tree in the morning, and I said, "Not today." And I knew it was Friday, and I was excited to go to the beginners meeting, and I left work, and I drive by, I'm heading towards the home, coming up towards this tree, and as I get up the road, there's a roadblock out in the middle of the road. I'm like, what the heck is going on? And I could see past the roadblock, and that 200-year-old oak tree had blown over. It was not a super windy day. There was a windy day, but it was not super windy, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It's like my higher power removed this piece of my life, removed my old ideas. And as it says, some of us tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. And I was stuck in my past, and I could not get out of my past. And he opened the door and said to me, it's time to move on. And that was another awakening for me. So I started moving on, and I've been, going through the step work diligently. You think of all the years that I drank. There's a lot of work to do still. I'm in my infancy of sobriety. I needed a connection with my higher power to change too. And I'm grateful for that, and I'm thankful for that. because I know from my experience that I can't do this on my own. You know, I tried that, and it failed me utterly. So, you know, I do what's asked of me, and more. Like I said, the changes that have come, sometimes they come quickly for people. Sometimes they come slowly for people. Sometimes people go through the educational variety, and sometimes changes come profoundly. I've had some changes that have come profoundly. Things that I was never able to do for myself for decades have changed. You know, and what do you say change? What do you need to change? Well, I needed to change just about everything. You know, change comes through willingness. One thing that I had never had for a long time was willingness. I had a sliver of willingness in that rehab. See, I never wanted to quit drinking. You know, the book talks about, you know, people trying to control their drinking, the alcoholic. I'm not saying I'm an outlier. What I'm saying is I never wanted to quit drinking, right? So, you know, that change has happened for me. Willingness, belief is another way that I've changed. I never had a relationship with a higher power. You know, I grew up Catholic, and I turned away from Catholicism at a very early age. I was defiant. I did not want that stuff forced on me. And I think because of the early childhood stuff, I had major trust issues, right? So, you know, belief, open-mindedness has been huge for me. Being able to look at things from a different perspective, you know, because I was blocked. I was blocked by what they call calamity. You know, calamity is drama. I had all kinds of drama going on in my life. Pomp. Well, pomp is ego. Even though I didn't think so, I didn't think I was ego. I didn't think I was playing God, but I kind of was. You know, I would sit on the throne of judgment, and I would judge people. You know, and that blocked me too, blocked me from my fellows. And worship of other things, you name it, you know. I was trying to fill a hole with all kinds of other things. Worship of other things, didn't matter. Didn't matter what it was, money, sex, shopping, everything but having a higher power, you know. So that's some of the biggest changes that have occurred to me. You know, I had a person ask me a few years ago, or a couple months ago, what changed, you know, this time. And the only thing that I can say, really, besides that, is that there's a great fact for us. And it's on page 25, and it says, there's a great fact for us that we've had deep and effective spiritual experiences that have revolutionized our whole way of thinking, you know, towards life, towards our fellows and God's universe, right? To me, that's been the biggest change. You know, I never believed in a higher power. And through some diligent working the steps, and looking back at my own experiences, that has changed. You know, I'm an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. I had no hope when I came into AA 3 years ago. Today I'm full of hope. The book tells us that we recover. We do. We do recover. Recover from what? It says a hopeless state of mind and body. Alcoholism centers in our mind. And it also controls our body. And what do I mean by that? The obsession of alcohol is in our mind. And I take that chemical alcohol and I put it into my body, I have an adverse reaction to what normal people have. Normal people start to get a little, hey man, I'm good after a couple drinks. Like, I'm in this good spot, right? Not me. I'm an alcoholic. I want more and more and more. They call it the allergy. See, for a normal person, the chemical alcohol kind of makes them sleepy. In a sense, me, the alcoholic, my body's different than theirs. It makes me excited. It makes me want more and more and more, until I usually black out or pass out. So step 2 was willingness. Step 3 was a belief. And these kind of came backwards for me. Step 4, writing the inventories out. Man, I was stuck. I got stuck in step 4 for months and months and months. In rumination. I got stuck in rumination, overthinking, you name it. And I eventually was able to move through that. And step 5, was a huge, huge awakening for me. Sitting with my sponsor and going through everything. Again, something that I was never willing to do. I did it with all my counselors. Years ago, I went to confession. I didn't find any relief in that. Even sitting with my counselors, I didn't really find any relief with that. Not until I sat with my sponsor, because I knew I had to sit with my sponsor and go through my 5th step with him. And that's when a huge change occurred for me. 6 and 7, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Again, I need a revolutionary change. I don't want any of those defects. It's going to take time to see what they are, because more is revealed every day. Some people don't like to see their defects and don't even recognize them. I can't work on myself if I don't know my defects. And we need to know them. I don't want to be sober sitting here, being a liar, a cheat, a thief, and a gossip. All that stuff. That's not sober behavior, in my opinion. To me, gossip is a big one. It's an evil and corroding thread. We're here for sobriety. We're here to recover. Not sit around and gossip about our fellows who are in recovery. That's just my opinion. And step 8 is willingness to make amends for the wrongs. There's a couple ways to do it. You can do it the Joe and Charlie way, right? The easy ones, right? These are ones I can do, right? And then there's the maybes, right? Well, maybe, right? You know. And then there's the other ones that never, right? Well, you know, that's one way. I look at it this way, like I don't look at it as never. You know, because if I look at it as never, it's kind of blocking me too. You know, that's blocking me from my higher power. And what I've realized is that anxiety and depression, anxiety is in the future and depression is in the past. And I lived in these two places for so long. And I cannot have a relationship with a power, a higher power, if I'm in those places. That relationship is right here today. And he works through us. Because he wants to see us succeed, in my opinion. You know, our primary purpose is to help others in this program. So, you know, I think that's an important aspect of the program, that we help others. You know, I've been so selfish for so long. You know, I didn't want to help others. I hardly wanted to help myself. You know, and today that's different. That's a big change. Again, that's just part of my recovery. You know, and my recovery, you know, may look different than what your recovery may look like. You know, I just know where I came from and what I had done and the things in my past and my track record that I needed to follow a path, you know. And that's a promise. It says right there, that's a promise. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. That's a promise. And there are over 150 promises in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous that go way beyond those 9-step promises. So,
good stuff.
thanks.
Appreciate it.